Today we are talking with Stephen M. Barkan, who is the director of the Law Library and the Voss Bascom Professor of Law at the University of Wisconsin. Steve, as Stephen prefers to be called, has been at the university since 1995. In fact, I should mention that we're here in his office here at the university in Madison, Wisconsin. Steve, let's begin with a little personal history. Could you tell us a little bit about your life, perhaps both when you were young and today?
Well, my life has been a good one. I'm happy to say. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I lived the first part of my childhood in Cleveland, and then second part of my childhood in Columbus, Ohio. I went off to college, came here to the University of Wisconsin to college. My spirit stayed here even after I graduated from college, went on to law school back in Cleveland, practiced law for several years in Columbus with my family's law firm, left, went to library school, and the rest I think we'll get into later. In terms of the other aspects of my life, I have two wonderful children. My daughter, Davida, lives in Boston, and she's a curatorial assistant at the Institute for Contemporary Arts in Boston. And my son, Dan, lives in New Mexico. He's a student at New Mexico State, and he recently joined the New Mexico National Guard, and he's heading off to basic training in 2 weeks. So.
Sounds like you were at that point in life when you've sort of gotten raised and you and the dean didn't even have to discuss it. Because,
That's right.
Your kids are now on their own, or certainly close to there.
And they both now have their own health insurance. So
that's another expense you don't have as a father.
A real relief, right.
I'm sure. Especially in these scary times in the health insurance area and healthcare. Can we talk a little bit about your formal education? What degrees do you hold, and where did you earn them?
Sure. Well, I had my bachelor's degree here in history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I have my law degree from Cleveland State University, and my library degree is from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
I noticed in looking over your biography before coming here today that you graduated from law school and then you practiced law for a while in Columbus, about 4 years as I recall. And
That's
then you decided to come back and go to library school. Is there anyone who played a role perhaps in that decision, influenced you to be a librarian or a law librarian?
Well, not going back, no one recruited me, no one talked me into or gave a pitch for law librarianship. I practiced law. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I was practicing with a family firm. I think I was doing fine. It was okay. I wasn't totally satisfied with it. When I was an undergrad here, I was just captivated by the university and loved this university in particular, and went to law school and got interested in the library. We had one of the library directors, and I think he was an interim director at the time, was a man named Pat Brown. He was one of my favorite law teachers, and so the notion of being a law librarian was put in my head. And then the law school hired Barty Wolf as our library director. And although I can't say when I was a law student, Barty and I were personal friends, Barty was a real presence. And I noticed him and what he did, and he was always very friendly. And it planted the seed in my head that there was this thing of law librarianship that might be interesting. I practiced law. It was fine, like I said, it was fine. And the actual fact is I walked into my office one day and I said, this is fine, but if I look into the future, what's going to change? And what's going to change is going to be the stack of files on my desk will get higher and my paycheck will get bigger, but this is not what I wanted to do. And so I did some reflection, and next step was an application to library school.
Well, I'm not surprised. And knowing Barty myself, he and I actually started in the profession just about exactly the same time. I was at the University of Houston, and he was up working with Roy Mirsky at the University of Texas. And my boss at Houston, Al Coco, my director, and I would drive up there to Austin to, talk with Roy and some of the people, see the library, pick up a list of salaries for all state employees that
Right.
that they had up there in those days, so we would be able to bring that back and see how things were. And Barty was up there, so I got to know him then. And
Well, it was great. Once I started working in libraries, we became good friends.
that does not surprise me.
Right.
He was quite a person. Well, let's talk a little bit about your career in law librarianship. You had practiced for a while. You went to library school, and then you ended up, as I recall, at the University of Southern California. Was that the first position?
That was my first position.
Yeah. Could you sort of take it from there? Talk a little bit about some of those positions, and
Sure.
maybe some of what you accomplished in them.
Well, I don't know that I accomplished much. They were great experiences. My first job out of library school was at USC. I interviewed at my first AAL meeting in 1980 in St. Louis. Got offered 2 jobs. One of them was at the University of Texas by Roy, and the other was by Albert Brecht at the University of Southern California. And there were great advantages and challenges to each. I struggled with which one to choose, but chose USC and Albert, and was I think it was a terrific choice. I went to USC. Albert was a tremendous director and great person for me to have as my first boss. Alan Hollick was my direct supervisor. Jill Sidford was my colleague who taught me how to be a reference librarian. Tori Trotta, Leonette Williams were all on the staff. We had terrific staff and a lot of fun.
Well, it's interesting. I also knew Albert, and between Albert and Roy, they were both absolutely first-class mentors, and you would have learned a lot from either. But of the two, I would suggest that you took the one who was the less scary with whom to work.
Well, as a baby law librarian, that was the case. I was really the folks at USC were very welcoming, and it was a good choice.
Well, you named a number of our colleagues who went on to a lot of major positions, both in their own work and in the association itself, and accomplished a lot. Unfortunately, in the case of Alan Hollick, his life was cut fairly short, although he had been on the executive board and was treasurer of AELL at one point before that. I'll say one more thing about Albert. He was a law student at the University of Houston. It started when I was in my second year there at the law library. And he worked for us in the law library, so I was somebody he in later life acknowledged as had an influence on his decision to come into our profession.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I hope it was a good influence.
It was a good influence on me, I'll tell you that. I appreciated working with him.
Mm-hmm. Well, you went on from the University of Southern Cal. Do you want to talk about some of those?
When I was in library school at the University of Michigan, Roger Jacobs came, who was a graduate of Michigan also, came as a scholar in residence or visiting scholar, and I met him and got to know him a little bit, as much as you can in a couple days. And just when I was in Los Angeles, saying, you know, I love this place, I'm never going to leave LA or this university, I was having a great time. Roger called me and said, well, we got a new position, a research librarian position at the court in Washington, D.C. Why don't you apply for it? And I did, and got the job and packed all my belongings in the back of my car and went to the other coast and worked in D.C. And that, too, was a great experience. Roger, of the people I've worked with, and I've had some great mentors in my career. Roger was and has been for me the role model of competence and civility and professionalism in this profession, and it was great working with him. Penny Hazelton was my supervisor at the court. We've been friends since that time, close friends since that time, and that was a tremendous experience. And everybody on the staff was extremely capable and a lot of fun to work with. And it was a rare privilege being able to work at the Supreme Court, at least for a period of time.
It's a very traditional sort of looking library. I mean, the whole place is, I guess, traditional in that sense. I remember visiting there, and in the elevators there were attendants, and this was not 1940, it was
Right.
1990.
Right. Yeah, it was a throwback in a lot of ways, but it was a magnificent facility and a tourist attraction, and it was quite interesting working in a tourist attraction. On any given day, you could have a congressman, a legislator, state Supreme Court justice, a celebrity. One day I met John F. Kennedy Jr. while I was working. That's a story too, but yeah, it was quite an experience.
I imagine it was. Well, you left the court at some point.
I left the court.
If anyone ever does, but actually the two people you named as your bosses at that time
They
both
both
went
did.
on to other places.
They both did. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I left the court.
So then you want to talk about that part of your career?
Well, I at that point, I left to go back to practice law. It was a combination of personal issue, relationship issues, plus the family firm was drawing, and I decided I would take a break. It's a very long story, which is not very interesting, but I left, I went back to practice law, and the honest truth of the matter is it took me about 15 minutes to realize that I had made one of the worst decisions of my life.
So the earlier decision to go into law librarianship was the better decision.
That was the better decision.
Yeah, all right.
Hands
So-
down. There's no... I was responding to other felt needs at the time, and not necessarily the best career choice for me. But so I went back to Ohio, practiced law. It took me several years to get out. When I decided I wanted to try to get back into librarianship, I found it very difficult. I had applied for some jobs. I was told very honestly, and I appreciated the candor, that I was a risk because I hadn't demonstrated sufficient.
You jumped
commitment.
ship, so to speak, at
I
least
jumped
once.
ship, and how do they know I really want to be a law librarian? And I guess I would ask those questions as well.
I never did anything quite like that. I stayed in the law library world, but I was still asked in those early years when I did interviews. Essentially, they wanted to know that I wanted to really be a law librarian, as opposed to using the office of director of the library as sort of an entree to the full-time teaching faculty
Sure,
at the place.
sure.
And I know many of our colleagues were asked those same questions
Right.
in job interviews in those years. So it's understandable, I guess, that faculties and deans have a certain degree of suspicion because there's a
Sure.
certain degree of risk in
There
who
is
they
a-
actually are hiring.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, it looks like you have done well anyhow. You've gotten back into the field. You've certainly risen to a very prominent level and of accomplishment. Do you want to sort of
Well,
talk
I
about
got
that
back
phase?
into the field pretty much thanks to Roy Mirsky,
Mm-hmm.
who
The mentor with whom you didn't work years earlier.
the mentor with whom I didn't work. We had, of course, I mentioned he offered me a job, and then
Mhm.
while I was at the court, I wrote a book review of fundamentals of legal research that was published in the Michigan Law Review, and it
Mhm.
caught his eye.
I'll bet it did.
So he, on one of his trips to Washington, Roy was a great traveler, and he came to Washington, called me up, and said, "Let's go out, let's do dinner and a movie," which we did, and we
Mhm.
uh, uh, developed a relationship, a friendship, and he said, "If you ever want a job, call me." And when I came back in, he had a job posted. I called him and went to Austin for an interview, and he said, I'm going to hire you. I'm going to take a risk
Mhm.
and hire you." And so, thanks to Roy, I'm back, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, Roy may have been a risk taker, but he was a very good calculating kind because he did just exactly that with many of our colleagues.
With
He
many.
he had a knack for identifying talent.
I
And,
agree with that.
And he hired only people from everything I ever heard who had what he thought what it took to achieve in this field.
Right. And working with him was a unique experience.
Mm.
That's the way people ask me, what was Roy like? Or what was it like working with him? And my response is, both the best and the worst of everything you've heard are true. For me, it was a very special experience. Roy had a certain style. He certainly ran a certain type of library, but we had a tremendous staff. I cannot think of better training for being a law librarian. I can't think of an environment where the role of law librarian is elevated to the level it is, as it is in Roy's library.
Mhm.
And he was a taskmaster. He
Mhm.
was certainly a taskmaster, but
Mhm.
he exposed us to what we needed.
Mhm. And then usually after he felt you were ready in the next sense, he helped you move on.
He sure did.
And I imagine he had a big role in that too.
he had a big role in that.
Mm-hmm.
He absolutely did. When he hires you, he says, you're not gonna believe, I'm gonna pay you so little money, but in 3 years you're gonna triple your salary. And in fact, he was right. The only time I've ever been audited by the IRS was when I worked for Roy, because they couldn't believe my salary was so low. Something in their algorithm kicked out my return as
Thought you were being paid under the table perhaps
Right,
in
or
cash and they
something,
wanted to
so-
see.
But he was right.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I've done it, as our readers hopefully know, a number of these conversations with colleagues, and I've heard this same line about Roy saying, I'll pay you a lot less than you're worth, or some variant of that, but in the long term, it's going to benefit you.
Right.
Some variant on that, just as you just recited.
I think it was his classic line.
Mm-hmm. So where did you go at that point?
Well, from Texas, I went to Marquette University
Mm-hmm.
in Milwaukee. That was my first directorship. That was 1987.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
So you came back up here to God's country?
Came back up here,
Mhm.
came back to Wisconsin. I was very excited about that. My Marquette experience was a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I came into what is probably the ideal situation for a new library director, and that is a law school that was very, very eager to upgrade its library.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank DeGeer, the dean, was very supportive. The faculty was very, very supportive. They appreciated the role of the library, and they were willing to put resources in it. We increased the staff. We enhanced the collection. We did all kinds of things that modern libraries do, and it was a very fulfilling period.
Sounds like a very overall satisfying experience in all the right senses of that term.
It was.
Mm-hmm.
It was.
Well, now, of course, you've moved across town a little bit, and you're here at the University of Wisconsin, the big boy in town.
Well, the university is certainly larger. Our law schools are getting more close in size, and it's definitely Marquette private university, urban in Milwaukee. This is major land-grant university, world research facility. It's great being here.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, for me, it's coming back to Madison, where I got the academic bug.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're still in beautiful country. Driving through the campus a little while ago, I noticed there's a lake nearby and the state capitol up the road.
State capitol. There's actually 3 lakes.
Yeah.
We're on an isthmus,
Mm-hmm.
and there are lakes on all sides.
And it's really a real college environment in this immediate area. I had to be very careful driving the car because all these I call them kids now.
Yeah, they get younger every year.
They do seem
They
to.
do.
I don't know how this is, but they do. But they were going every which way. And
That's
many of
right.
them on bicycles, and some with cell phones in their ears. And
It's a very vibrant community.
But I got
Yeah.
through without running anybody down, so that was good.
Well, that's good.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have done a number of things outside of your formal places of employment. You've served our profession in various ways. You've been authors of chapters in several editions of Fundamentals of Legal Research. So you not only reviewed it many years ago, you
Well,
turned around and became part of it.
Got involved. That was part of working with Roy.
Yeah.
Getting involved in it.
And you've written in the Marquette Law Review, the Legal Reference Services Quarterly, and even the Law Library Journal. You want to talk a little bit about some of that type of work, and maybe why you, as a member of the academic end of our profession, and as a director, felt that was important for you?
Well, it was practically important because when I went to Marquette, I was on a tenure track, and we had publication requirements, and I was compelled to produce some kind of scholarly record. I, of course, enjoyed it and benefited from it, but part of being on the faculty was producing some kind of scholarly work product, and I started teaching at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Also, what do I guess there's a question there about what role do I think scholarship should play?
Well, I think, your views on that, certainly for yourself, and maybe perhaps should it play a role for law librarians more generally? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, I had a mandate to do it because it was part of the job, but I also enjoyed it, and it was
Mhm.
also a creative outlet, and was a way of being productive. Should law librarians publish in the broad sense? I think that's It's a hard question. Uh, Law librarianship is a profession, and a profession uh, uh, needs to create a scholarly body of literature, both on itself and what it professes. So librarians should publish. I don't know that that means that every librarian needs to publish. Lawyers should publish, but I don't think every lawyer needs to be a writer.
Mhm.
S- uh, you know, whether or not a law librarian or a law library director or a reference librarian or an acquisitions librarian should be publishing, I think, is very situation specific and
Mhm.
contextual. Uh, unlike the generic law faculty member, where you can say, oh, every law faculty member must teach, write, and do service.
Mhm.
It's not the same for a law librarian, because our institutions provide different opportunities and different expectations. I've been very lucky in my career in working with deans and faculties that gave me a lot of leeway
Mhm.
and either wanted me to write or permitted me to write and gave me the resources to do it, or created teaching opportunities for me, or let me teach. Everyone doesn't have that situation. I've been both at Marquette and especially here. I've been working with members of our library staff who are experienced and capable, with great judgment, who really don't need me managing their day-to-day activities, and they know how to be librarians, and they know what they need to come to me for, and without the support of the strong staff, I wouldn't be able to write or to teach or to do those
Mhm.
things. So is it, yeah, you need to have a context where it's accepted and supported. Do I think our library staff has to write? Well, we have members of our staff who write.
Mhm.
They want to write. Some of them write articles about legal research, about acquiring and managing budgets. They write about library stuff.
Mhm.
Some members of our staff write short stories and novels, and that's good too.
Mhm.
It's a creative outlet for them. When somebody comes to me with any kind of creative project, I am as supportive as I can be. But in the final analysis, I'm not hiring them to write.
Mhm.
I think someone can be a terrific reference librarian, a wonderful assistant director, and not write a thing.
Mhm.
And so in terms of my priority, I focus on what I call the librarian patron interface, and that's the crux. And if I've got a good relationship and good service, I'm not going to say
Mhm.
to a librarian, no, you could be a better librarian if you would write an article,
Mhm.
which would not be the case with a law teacher or a law
Mhm.
faculty member. So, yeah, I think librarians can and should write. Those who have the opportunity
Mhm.
and the desire say the same thing about teaching.
Mhm.
Librarians should be teachers.
So your view is that as the head of the library, you would empower those who are under your direction to do what they do best.
Well,
Would
sort
that
of.
be sort of a
My, as the head of the library, um, my role is to provide the best services to the students and faculty of this law school that I
Mhm.
can.
all right?
That's the starting point. And it's not just to do what they do best.
All right.
So if they are a tremendous writer and not a very good reference librarian, I've got a problem.
Okay. That does seem to make sense. As a former director, now retired, I can fully understand that.
Right. So I wouldn't go so far as to say it's all free, you know, let's all be the best that we can be.
Can't let everyone choose exactly what they want to do all the time and do nothing
That's right.
else. Yeah, you
That's
have
right.
needs that have to be met for
That's
the
right.
place. Yeah, I hear you. And I'm sure our viewers will as well.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you know, Steve, many of the people with whom I've been able to speak for these histories have retired like I have, and are sort of been away from the field thus for a bit. And there's a tremendous change underway. We all know that there's an awful lot more digital information today than there was even a decade ago when I was still active. So there's been a tremendous changes. And do you have any thoughts about, you know, where things may be headed for law librarians and law librarianship and the delivery of access to legal information over the next
Well, I
say
have
few
thoughts.
years?
Sure I do.
You're a working person
I'm
in
a
this
working
environment.
person.
Sure.
Yeah. Where I think we're headed, and I gotta limit my comments to law school libraries because that's the world I live in, and
Mhm.
I don't really know other worlds as well. But I think we're in a period of change. Of course, it's obvious we're in a period of change. I think we're headed where legal education is headed.
Mhm.
And of course, legal education is headed where the legal profession is headed. But so I think there are certain things about our future that are very clear. That as in the past, but increasingly in the future, technology is going to play a larger role in what we do. It permeates everything we do now,
Mhm.
but it's going to continue to play a large role. I think the financial world is going to continue to change. The eras of incremental budget increases are essentially gone. All of legal education is going to have to find a way to deliver its product, if not cheaper, certainly not with an assumption that incremental tuition increases will be there to support whatever programmatic needs are necessary. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to actually have to live the rhetoric that we've been using for the last 15 or 20 years. You know, the access versus ownership, the
Mhm.
service versus collection. All of those things are going to become more than rhetoric. I mean, we're really going to have to learn how to deliver legal information in an efficient way, and that's going to be necessary to our survival.
Mhm.
And we're going to be, you know, we're only as strong as the institution we're part of, and as and whatever we do has to advance that institution. So I think that's where we're going. I don't have a crystal ball any more than anyone else does,
Mhm.
but times are changing, and you know, those who survive will be those who are nimble
Mhm.
and can make the adjustments.
Mhm. Sounds like a pretty fair analysis
Well-
from everything I understand.
I wish
Yeah.
I had some deeper insights of it,
Mhm. Well,
but
as you say, times are changing, and one cannot always be absolutely sure of what those changes may ultimately be.
you can't be sure. I think, you know, the world is getting more complex.
Mhm.
Our users are coming in with different skills than they had before.
Mhm.
The amount of information is still growing. There's still a need for that patron-librarian interface. It's going to change. We're going to have to do different things
Mhm.
to support scholarship and teaching, but there'll still be a role.
Yeah.
And I think one of the real dangers is we regard the past as the golden years. You know, you know, and whatever is happening is coming down from where, and things are changing.
Mhm.
Things are changing, and they'll continue to change.
You know, sort of on that note of the golden years and so on, and thinking back to my early days in the profession, you know, the librarians who preceded me essentially came in, and the era they were part of, there wasn't an awful lot of change. Certainly the law book industry was pretty much the same from one end to the other of that. Law libraries became larger. They had become a little more organized from a librarian standpoint. So cataloging and good acquisitions control and so on became more and more the case. And then we started to move into the what we called at the time computer era. We had a few databases, Lexis, Westlaw. We had a few systems for tracking acquisitions and buying materials online, as we call it today, that began to come in. And, you know, many librarians, I remember, worried that the golden era was past and that this new era was scary. And yet, look what we were able to do and how tremendously exciting it was for those of us who were part of it. And I suspect today there's some of the same kind of thinking. You know, but is it a little scary? But the probabilities are, I think, and I think you agree, are perhaps very exciting.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there are going to be a lot of opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Well, Steve, sort of on that note, as we sort of near the end of our conversation today, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention?
That's wide open.
Exactly.
You know, and when we were talking about this interview, you just wanted to talk about my story and my experience, and I think if there's couple things I would say, wherever I've wound up or what I've done, for example, coming to Wisconsin was never predicted. I had, but the way my career developed was never planned.
Mm-hmm.
It was strictly a happenstance. You know, I would come, whether it was at Marquette or whether it was at Madison. I came and I said, my boss is the dean, I work for the law school, I'm a member of the faculty,
Mm-hmm.
and I do however I spend my time is in the best interest of the law school, and of course, me, I want to do something that I enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And things just develop. And so if I have a reflection on it, is that be open to that which can develop, because it can take you in directions that you never expected. And that you can't do everything. I've found as a library director, maybe this is a comment on my limitations, but I have publications, I teach, I have other administrative roles. I found that in addition to being a library director, I could typically handle one major outside activity at a time, whether it was writing an article, teaching a class or two, writing a self-study report. I could, but when I started to get into 2 or 3, I would feel I'm not doing my duty to the library. I'm not performing at the level I'd like to perform. So sometimes people say, Steve, how do you do it all? And my answer is I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do it all. I do some of it. And what I don't do, I work with really good people who cover for me. And but I think being realistic about limitations is something that I've learned over the years. That pick what you can do and focus on it, and know your limits.
Mm-hmm. Now, usually I consider that sort of the last word and don't interject anything new, but there was one thing I remembered that you did. I remembered seeing it. Many of us, as directors, academic directors, do get involved in accreditation visits of various sorts for the ABA and the Association of American Law Schools. And you've presumably done your share of those, but you've done at least a few of them of foreign programs law schools maintain in other countries. Could you talk a little bit about that? Not many of us had that experience.
Well, that was, when that happened, that was, being a foreign program site evaluator, that was strictly thanks to Dan Freeling, who was the deputy consultant at the ABA, who opened the opportunities up to law library directors, and that's how that happened. Of course, like many of us, I've been on site teams, regular site teams over the years, and those are always tremendous experience. I always come back with more. I feel like I came back benefiting more than I contributed in that. But so that's how that happened. One of the interesting things I've been able to do here at Madison is start a study abroad program. So we have a 1-month program every summer, which unfortunately begins at about the same time that the AALL annual meeting begins. We do it, it's a partnership with Marquette. And it's in Germany, and it's a month every summer, and that's been a real nice experience and good way to contribute in other ways to the program.
Well, it sounds like you've enjoyed being part of that as well. I suppose as a site inspector, you came back, as we all did from inspections, with some ideas that we saw things being done, and maybe you were able to incorporate some of those here
Sure.
with the program
Sure.
at the university and with Marquette.
Well, one of the things about being a site evaluator, whether it's locally or on a foreign program, is that you get to see what it's like from the other side. And then when you get evaluated, you understand what that routine is like also.
Well, maybe on that note, I should thank you on both my behalf, Stephen Barkan, and on behalf of our colleagues Michelle Wu, Frank Hodak, and Dick Spinelli, with whom I have the honor of being able to produce these interviews that will comprise the entire body of an oral history of law librarianship in the Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf section of Hein Online. Thank you for being part of it today.
Thank you, Pat, for including me. It's a real privilege.